Ladies and gentlemen, in the blue corner, standing at a sleek 5'11", 245 pounds, the tumultuous tempest of technique, Thomas Lilly. And in the red corner, at a curvaceous 5'11", 315 pounds, the jovial juggernaut of judgment, John Cheryl Sheridan. A meeting of the masters of mastication. Turn your attention as they delve deep into all things lifting and more. This is Peak Speak.
Are you happy with the subject for today, individualization?
As long as you don't make me say the word too many times.
It's so fucked.
That's one of those words that I'm inevitably going to fuck up. Specificity, I often fuck up. Look how huge your lats look in that.
Huh?
Lats looked real big there.
Oh, Sam, let's edit this into the entire podcast.
just 60 minutes of me saying your lats look really big.
Superimpose my face onto just me stretching the entire time.
It's really fucking cold in Canberra this morning. It's like -4 outside.
Yes, I noticed instead of getting ready for the podcast that you were just meandering around on Instagram posting photos of your cup, which you probably spent about an hour getting the right angle for.
About 10 seconds, but you know, close enough.
Yeah, same deal. 10 seconds late is just as bad as 3 days late to me.
You're such a fuckwit. You sat down and then you were like, "No, nah, bad news, I got to poo." Dickhead. Alright, shall we start this?
Yeah, are we on?
Yeah, I guess so.
So, I thought we'd start with suggestions from Sam for some back and forth discussion, and Sam has sent through a photo of which is extremely Jimmy rustling.
Are we at the position where we're calling out companies now? I just want to pull up this photo so I can look at it at the same time.
Okay, we're pulling up a photo of an undisclosed company that shall not be named, that definitely has not already been named, and the caption says...
We just need like a censored bar, like a boop, as you say it. I think that'd be great. Sam, get on it.
Media team, you're on it. There are no nasties hidden in beep. No white rice, white potato, cream bread, pastry, or cheese in any of our meals. That's why we are endorsed by GPs/doctors, health experts, diabetic consultants, and PTs/gyms throughout Australia. Let me first say that if you're going to a dietary source whose best call is that they're endorsed by PTs, it's probably not the best dietary source, right?
Also,
it's
just to clarify, in that, they capitalise the G in gyms. You don't capitalise that G. That's a typo.
Well, and they capitalise diabetic consultants. Note that they're not endorsed by dietitians or nutritionists.
No.
The people that have actual qualifications in determining what's good food, but GPs/doctors and PTs and gyms. Please throw some water on my fire right now. But since when is white rice and white potato and bread and cheese bad food?
Cheese is the devil. It's been widely studied, and we all know that cheese is the devil. And I just don't know.
Cheese is literally Lucifer, is what you're saying.
Basically, yes. It is
that doesn't make sense.
It is unfortunate that it is just so universally excellent to eat. But I'm happy to fight fire with fire and just play with the devil by eating lots of cheese.
So you're saying that when we die and inevitably end up in hell, that...
because of all those high squats we've done.
Satan, surrounded by molten hot fire, is a piece of cheese.
Yeah, dude, but it's like
Is he liquid cheese, like queso sauce? No,
it's like halloumi, so he's just real crispy on the outside, but hasn't actually melted. Sidebar, halloumi is a fucking excellent cheese.
It is a great cheese. The cheese of my people.
I'm yet to
very
go
Mediterranean.
down the road of, often there's at burger joints that I go to, they have a vegetarian option that's a halloumi patty instead of a like beef patty. And I haven't done it yet, but I've always talked about the idea of going and ordering just a regular beef burger and then getting them to put a halloumi patty on top at the same time.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, right? But it's also thoughts like that that make me pretty convinced that my fatness is inherent in just, you know, my day-to-day choices. But hey, it's fun.
That's very quirky of that burger place to not go with the standard portobello mushroom patty.
I've seen those too. I can't remember where I saw it, but I've seen it at a couple of places.
It's at basically every hip burger place ever now.
True. There's a hip coffee place near me that does halloumi nuggets. They're fucking excellent. I took Mike Israetel. Took Mike Israetel and James Hoffman and those guys here there last year. And yeah, Mike loved the halloumi nuggets. Anyway, we got real sidetracked there, which is not a huge surprise. So, bad nutrition is bad. That's about the extent of that.
This is Peak Speak, and we are starting as of now. Today's episode is around individualization, which we are going to try and avoid saying as much as possible because it's early in the morning and that word has far too many letters and / or syllables for our small brains to handle right now. I didn't hear what you said.
I believe it's pronounced syllables.
Oh, syllables. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's all about
so too many syllables.
It's all about the emphasis on your sentences. If I move my computer closer, will you be able to hear me better?
Yeah, it cuts out every time we talk at the same time.
Ah, classic.
Plus, you look way better this close. Now we're talking. Hello. I get too close.
There's an optimal window.
We're talking about individualization in powerlifting. We're talking about where does it need to occur in powerlifting? Does it need to occur in powerlifting? What facets are important to individualize when you're doing programming or coaching? Is there a case for over-individualization? All of that kind of thing. So, Jonathan, can I call you John, or is it Jonathy, like a sort of shortened Timothy?
It's definitely not that at all. You can call me whatever you like. My name is not Jonathan, though. In the same way.
I am aware of that, you know.
That's all right. I'm just going to call you Tom, and it'll be good.
Okay, we are never continuing this podcast because you have called me the forbidden name.
What about Thom? What if we shorten Thomas to Thom?
That's what all the telemarketers call me. Thom or Thomas. And it's not Lily, it's always Lily.
Thomas Liley. Here I am with Thomas Liley. That's the best. Right. You shouldn't have told me that. I'm never going to call you Thomas again.
Stop individualizing my name. It is just Thomas, like every other Thomas. What is your stance / thoughts on individualization? Let's start with, do you think it has a case in powerlifting?
Definitely. I think any pursuit where you're involving the very complex system that is a human body has to have some element of individualization. Fuck, can we stop saying that? I've said it once and I'm already stumbling over syllables.
Did you just go to say some elephant?
Yes, that's exactly what I went to say. So I think it's one of those things that definitely has a place. There are a lot of factors to consider. Having said that, there are a lot of similarities, right? I think that there are very common issues, and we've talked about that in the episode on like injuries and stuff like that. There are a lot of common patterns because powerlifting is a very sort of one-dimensional sport in many ways, where it's 3 very defined lifts and they're all going to look pretty similar for most people. But the training process itself definitely has to have some element of individualization.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let's start with technique. because both of us kind of build our coaching philosophy on this hierarchy of importance of things. And I'm pretty sure we're the same in saying that technique sits pretty high up in that hierarchy, because technique's going to determine how you program, what exercises you select, how you perform those movements is going to be integral into the rest of the training system, right? So when it comes to technique, like you just said, like you just touched on, we're all doing the same thing in terms of we're all doing squats, we're all doing bench press, we're all doing deadlift. So for me as a coach, when I approach fixing the technique, I recognize that within those systems, those lifts, of course they are complex, it's a lot of things happening at once. There's certain rules that apply across the board, right? Doesn't matter how you build, doesn't matter your training background, your sporting background, there are certain rules which apply to everyone. For example, how you breathe and brace. And we covered this a lot in the systems podcast, I believe, as well. But getting more in depth into that, so once you get past those rules, there are individual nuances. What really intrigues me in this whole individualization concept is how much that individualization comes into play. And it's a case of considering that the perfect technique for you as a person is going to be defined by the most efficient, the most safe, and the strongest way to lift that weight, right? And at any given point in time, that's going to be slightly different. Our job as a coach is to take a lifter and say, how can we make this technique better? And in doing so, depending on how much change needs to occur, it might actually do the opposite for a period of time, right? So people will say, you know, let's talk about deadlifts, for example. Someone with a really, really, really rounded back that can generate heaps of speed off the floor and lock out. When you put them into a straight back position, if they can even get there in the first place at that point in time, let's say they can, you put them in a straight back position, all of a sudden they feel a hell of a lot weaker, right? And they'll say, well, this isn't the best technique for me. No, it just feels weaker at that point in time. If you've built your strength in a technique that is maybe less ideal than perfection over an extended course of time, a couple of years, don't expect that to feel amazing in the next couple of days, right? Or on the first day. It takes a bit of time for you to adapt to that technique. So I think what happens when it comes to individualization, because I think the biggest case for individualizing powerlifting, coaching, and programming comes into the technical side of things. Because, again, like we keep saying, everyone's built slightly differently. Everyone has different sporting backgrounds, all that kind of thing. I think when it comes to the case of individualizing, people can get caught up in this idea that they are special, that they are different, that the rules don't apply to them, and it gets drummed into their heads that, hey, you need something that works for you. And if that becomes a roadblock and you become closed off to any other way of moving, any other way of doing things, you become more and more closed into this box where you're unrelenting on that sort of thing. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, man, and I think it's really common, like you said, especially I think in like newer or relatively novice level lifters who, you know, go through that initial phase of like, I get like heaps of really easy progress early on. They get into powerlifting, they really start to take it seriously, they start following a bunch of people on Instagram, and then suddenly they want to try all these things because, you know, that person's doing it and it seems like they're doing really well, or they start using other people as justification for their choices. Like, oh, this, you know, person X squats like that, so it's okay that I squat like that. I think it's a very, very dangerous road to go down, especially if you haven't had a lot of guidance in the process early on. If you're entirely self-taught, you're going to find that a lot of these things seem like a really good idea and people can justify them to you very well, but ultimately it may not be the best for you long term. And I think that's the important thing to look at when it comes to individualization of technique, is not necessarily, like you touched on, not necessarily what feels best right now, but what's going to be the most conducive to success in the long term. I've seen plenty of people use that this is what works for me line or sort of qualifier. But I think often those people are looking at a short-term window where this is a technique that I've gotten strong at. And I think especially in powerlifting, in a sport that relies on technical efficiency, and I think more so in sports like weightlifting where it is so technical that you're actually sort of forced to get really good early on at the technique, because if you don't, you won't make much progress. Whereas powerlifting is a little bit more forgiving to a certain extent, in that you don't have to be really good to get very strong. I've seen plenty of people get very, very strong in what I would consider suboptimal positions, and inevitably that strength stops at some point. They stop making progress, either because they got hurt or because they just run into a wall and aren't able to go any further. And that's where it becomes really dangerous, and not having someone to essentially call you on your bullshit can be really harmful in that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. I think without, at the risk of getting too technical, I think people as well kind of, you know, your body is a very amazing thing, and people will gravitate automatically, especially when they're self-taught, or especially when they develop issues or injuries or instabilities or whatever, they'll gravitate to the most stable position, which is going to allow them to move more weight. And when you change them into what might be a biomechanically stronger position, potentially, like has the, you know, there's the, it's going to be in the long run a better position to be in, if they don't have the prerequisite stability, and they look at the change in technique as just some minor thing. So for example, grip width on bench. When you're nice and close in, your stability is coming just from your structure. You know, you're nice and close. Think of it like holding a box close to your chest versus holding a box out here. If you hold a box out there, you need more stability, right? Same thing on bench. If you take your hands a little bit wider, yes, you can load up the prime movers a little bit more, provided that you have the prerequisite stability through the movement. And most people have brought their grip in or brought their stance in on squat to get around those stability issues. It's the same thing with heels versus flats on squats. Heels provide a crutch for stability, and if you remove those heels, you remove the stability, all of a sudden it feels really, really shocking, or you might not be able to hit depth. Where your stance is far less important than the underlying issue which caused you to change your stance or your footwear or whatever in the first place. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, right? Because if you don't have a coach guiding you through that process, or if you don't understand that process yourself, what you're gonna do is you're gonna bench with a really super close grip, like closer than mid grip, like an uncomfortably close grip, because that's the only way you can bench. Then you're gonna say, okay, well, I've already tried to take my hands out wider and I know that it doesn't work for me. But if you've measured that simply by where your hands sit on the bar rather than how it worked within the system, if you went from a close grip where you had a lot of stability in the system to a wide grip where you didn't know how to engage that stability, or you didn't have that underlying stability, of course it's going to feel terrible out there. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, and they dig themselves into this hole of thinking, this doesn't work for me, that doesn't work for me, and it becomes this sort of cyclical thing where they keep closing that gap, closing that mind, closing that openness to new ideas, new techniques, changes in technique, all that kind of stuff. And it's that poison of over-individualization, I think. Now, that said, one question that we had when we were talking privately earlier is there a time and a place for those, you know, those little things to occur? And I think there definitely is. Like, if you come to me and you're 8 weeks out of a comp and I look at your technique and I don't think it's very good, am I going to make major changes to you? Well, probably not, because what matters at that point in time is you lifting the most weight possible at that comp in 8 weeks, right? That's what matters to you. And it would be irresponsible for me as a coach to really, you know, put you in a position where you're going to feel a lot weaker, feel a lot less confident in your technique. That's going to create some problems. So it's about meeting in the middle and, you know, maybe improving stability within the technique, maybe changing some cueing, and then post competition, when you've got the time to really ingrain some changes in technique, that's when we'll start playing around with it.
I think at that point it's also worth touching on the idea of doing that change gradually, like regardless of where you are from like in terms of how far out you are from a meet. If you walk in and you squat in a way that, you know, I don't think is very good, what we're not going to do is completely scrap the whole thing and start again. We're going to add something or give you one thing to focus on for a little while, and then maybe a couple of weeks later we adjust another thing. And I think that's where, like you said, people run into, oh, well, that didn't work for me. And it's often because they make this really massive change, like you said, without actually looking at it as a massive change and understanding that it's a long-term process, because it's a long-term push towards technical perfection. Now, I don't think the perfect squat or the perfect bench exists, really, because at some point, if it's really perfect, you just put more weight on it, and inevitably something will crop up, regardless of how proficient you are at the movements. There's a breakdown point somewhere. It's just about finding that. I think starting with little things and building up to the bigger changes is the way to do it from a long-term standpoint, but that's the sort of thing that's best done in a phase where the weight can be a little bit lighter, the pressure isn't on in that time frame to rush through things, because that's when often you'll just make things even worse by getting in the lifter's head. You like you said, you reduce their confidence in their abilities, you give them too much to think about. At a certain point, you need to be able to turn your brain off and just execute. And I know you've said it in the past, and I've stolen it and been using it a whole bunch lately. But like, your technique under max weights is an average of every rep you do in training, right? So when you try and change things in that really short time frame, the chance of running into several issues are very high. And I think it's a risk-reward thing at that point. How far out from the meet are you, and how much are you going to get out of that change, but also how much are you going to have to take away to reinforce that change and to make it a more permanent thing, not just a fleeting focus point. This is a permanent and long-term change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the real art of individualization when it comes to technique is not in the way that everyone would appear to lift differently according to their individual mechanics and proportions. Because as a coach, and you'd experience this yourself, I believe it big time, is that, you have a picture in your head of what a squat looks like. You have an idea in your head of what a bench looks like. And you will coach each lifter to chase that visual representation of the mechanics that you believe should occur in a bench press, right? So if you've got someone with a super close grip or a super wide grip, you're going to change it to the grip that you believe is best for them, and what's best for them is going to be pretty consistent across your board of lifters, right? There's going to be very few cases that are extreme cases. And we can say this because we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the last few years, right? And you develop this idea of, okay, people kind of fall into brackets. Not everyone is completely different. I think the true art of individualization is that is being able to cater your messages, cater your coaching to elicit that same response in lots of different people. So one of the criticisms that I get about my coaching, which is actually probably the biggest compliment that I can get, is all your lifters look the same. So when they do a squat, it looks the same. I'm like, that is exactly what I want. I'm delivering a product that says this is what I believe the best way to squat is. And when they say they look the same, what they're talking about is the way their hips move, the way their back moves, the way they're bracing, all of that stuff looks the same. That's what I'm teaching. When you look at my lifters a little bit more closely, you'll notice hand grips are all different. You'll notice foot widths are all different. You'll notice footwear is all different. Lots of things are very different because that's based on them. But the cueing and the coaching that I work with my lifters over time is it changes between individuals so we can elicit the same response regardless of sporting background, regardless of build, regardless of all of this stuff. And that's a representation of my beliefs, my philosophy of what a squat is, what a bench is, what a deadlift is. That's what individualized coaching is to me when it comes to technique, is being able to deliver messages to elicit the same response. I think if you're looking at lifters under a particular coach or under a particular brand, and they're all lifting very differently, that there's some sort of inconsistency, there's a lack of solidarity in that coaching, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I think that's more a relaxed thing, saying, I can't fix it or I don't want to fix it. You know what I mean?
I think to not necessarily to play devil's advocate to that point, because I totally agree with you. I think the ability to produce a consistent product despite the variance that comes through the people that we see is really important, because there are those landmarks that we look for as a coach, right? Those rules or those foundational principles. Having said that, the other thing to consider is that when all you see is like a lifter at a meet or a lifter on Instagram or, you know, wherever, you don't always have the context. So you don't necessarily know where that lifter is in their training cycle. You don't know where that lifter is in their training age. That could be a lifter who's got 25 years of lifting experience and a list of injuries as long as my leg that have a substantial impact upon their ability to move. And so when you criticize people for bad technique, you need to have more context, right? And this is where it's a bad idea to judge your technical prowess based against other people, or to try and emulate other people, especially if you don't have a sound understanding of biomechanics and anatomy and physiology. You don't have the context for that person. You don't have their injury history. You don't have their sporting background. You don't have their, genetic background, those sort of things, right? So when you don't look at all those factors, it seems really simple, but when you look at the sort of deeper understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, some of those things become a little bit more sort of justifiable, would be the way to put it, right? The message should be always consistent. The foundational principles are the same regardless of how you're built. The overall outcome, like you said, is going to be a little bit different. There's going to be differences in grip width, in stance, and stuff like that. And that's where the context becomes really important.
Definitely. All right. Okay, so that kind of really touches on the technique side of stuff really nicely. So it seems like a good segue into programming. When it comes to programming, I believe this strongly again falls under this concept of the coaching philosophy, or if you're a lifter and you're self-coaching, your philosophy of what lifting is, right? And this is something that I really drum into the mentoring clients that I have. So I mentor a lot of coaches through Zero, and this is something that we talk about a lot. So, under your philosophy, again, you've got this kind of hierarchy of importance of things, right? And your programming has to be determined by your technique, because what you're chasing, what you're trying to improve about your lifting needs to be reflected in the exercises that you choose. So, for me personally, as a coach, I believe that a lot of the individualization comes into the technique side of things, because then underneath that, in the programming, a lot of the exercises that you're going to choose as a coach or as a lifter are going to be reflective of what you believe is important, of what you believe is going to contribute to better lifting as a whole, and that's going to determine furthermore your set ranges, your rep ranges, your percentages, what sort of intensities that you do in any given point of time and in any given proximity to a competition, all of that kind of thing. So how important do you think individualization is when it comes to programming? Because you see people talking about templates, cookie cutters, you see people talking about like starting with a blank page every single time and starting from fresh. How important do you think having very individualized programming is?
I think it's definitely got value, and again, it comes back to context, right? A lot of that, I think, is probably around the volume end of things, in how much total work people are doing, because there's a big difference between someone who spends 6 days a week on the tools shoveling concrete to someone who sits on their ass for 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, right? So then we look at training age, we look at training background, all of those sort of things. Like work capacity, I think, is definitely important to be individualized, but within that, there's definitely some wiggle room, and I think a lot of people will subconsciously adapt their work capacity once they develop a bit of an understanding of how they feel and that connection with how they're responding to training. People will often, skip things and do stuff like that, and I'm not one to go and tag a bunch of people in the frustrated strength coach thing, because I'm not you, but at the same time, that's within the framework, right? So the way I do the programming at Burley Strength, we have two different membership levels, essentially. We have a basic and a premium, and with the basic one, you get a template-based program. Now, these aren't, just templates I find on the internet and give to people, but are instead templates that I've developed over time that are based on my philosophies, that I tweak and I adjust over time with experimentation. But at the same time, they're not completely sort of catch-all blanket statements, right? There is some level of individualization around assistance exercises and things like that. For most people, the main lift progressions are very similar, if not the same. And I find that works reasonably well for most people because, like you said, I think the really important end of the individualization argument is technical skill and the way you approach exercises. So I could have two lifters who I've prescribed front squats for. One of them might be because we want to deliberately overload their quads, or one of them's overloading that upright torso position. It's just about how you think about the movements rather than the movements themselves and the reasons behind putting that movement in there. For someone, I might give you a pause squat that's not necessarily designed to really drastically overload that bottom position or anything like that, but is instead a teaching tool. It's a way to remind you of what those positions feel like. And so that's where it's important to understand the distinction between practice and training. And I think that's often where a lot of the individualization I do comes in is, okay, here's the base for your program, here's the template, here are some things I want you to add into warm-ups, some things I want you to add into in between sets and stuff like that to help you reinforce the technical spectrum of things, because I think that's where the real progress is made for the vast majority of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really like that. The performance of those accessory exercises is going to determine the quality of how they carry over into the main lift. And if you're a powerlifter, at the end of the day, your squat, your bench, your deadlift, they're the things that matter. Your accessory exercises exist as accessories to those exercises to make them better, right? So we're not just throwing accessory exercises at you hoping that you get better. They're there for a defined reason. And I think that's really the art of individualization, again, is having really, really, really solid justification behind the accessory exercises that are going into any given program. Much like yourself, for me, the majority of people are going to get the same progressions on the main lifts. They're going to get very similar accessory exercises. They're going to be individualized primarily in the stability work based on where things are falling apart for them. But squat, bench, deadlift, if you have a really, really ingrained, solid understanding of what those lifts should be at that point in time, because over time your belief and your understanding of those lifts is going to change, your accessory exercises should reflect that. So one thing I hear talked about a lot because people, advertise as fully customized programming. I don't even know what that means, but or they'll advertise fully customized programming and say, get away from cookie cutters. I really like that word cookie cutter because I like to flip it on its head, right?
I also like cookies.
Yeah, who doesn't? Because cookies are awesome. So cookie cutter is used as a term to kind of say everyone's getting the same program, right? So think about what a cookie is, or what a cookie cutter is. If you come to me and you say, I want to be a gingerbread man, and I get out a star-shaped cookie cutter, that's not a good idea, right? If I get a cookie cutter that's shaped like a gingerbread man, that's going to deliver you the kind of shape cookie that you want. That's a good thing, right?
Round and delicious.
Hey?
Round and delicious. That's the kind of shape I
exactly.
want.
Exactly. That's the kind of shape you are.
Thank you.
The important thing when you hear the word template is that template is not a fixed thing. It's a fluid thing. It does change. It's a base. So one thing that I get a lot with the coaches I mentor is that when we come to the programming exercise, I'll give them a bunch of hypothetical lifters, you know, a lighter lifter, a heavier lifter, a stronger lifter, a newer lifter, and I'll tell them to write a peak or a hypertrophy phase or whatever. And what you'll find when people write things down, as a coach, you have ingrained, okay, hypertrophy looks like this amount of sets, this amount of reps, this amount of this amount of that, right? These accessory exercises, and they end up writing the same thing for all different people, just with different numbers, right? That's what a template's for. It's to be like, this is my underlying belief, right? This needs to change based on whatever this individual needs, which may be changes in stability, which may be, as you said, changes in volume or intensity based on where they are at any given point in time. I think on the flip side of that, similar to what we were saying before with technique about the over-individualization concept, is that, and you'll experience this all the time when people say, oh, I can't do more than sets of 5. Bullshit. Grab an empty bar and squat it for 10 reps. You can do that easy. If you can't do more than 5 reps, it's because you're always training at intensity that doesn't allow you to do that. The key to getting stronger, the key to getting better or fitter or leaner is to break adaptation. And to do that, you need to do more work in some way, shape or form, be it more volume, more reps, more sets, more weight than you were before. Right? That's the key to breaking adaptation. And the people that play this I can't do more than X amount of work card are the worst, because they always can. They just need to develop that underlying work capacity. And what you'll find is that's when individualization comes in, right? Because if I believe this is the kind of volume that you should be able to handle into a peaking phase, and you don't have the prerequisite work capacity, and I throw you at that, you are going to break. Right? So I need to assess you if you're in close proximity of comp and say, okay, well, you're not going to handle the kind of volume that I'd normally give at this point. We'll make some changes. However, far away from that, we need to be developing that work capacity, which everyone is capable of, because we are engineered to be able to move, to be fairly fit and healthy. We just dig ourselves into these holes where we cannot, right? And lifters are really, really good examples of digging themselves into holes where they can only do singles, triples, doubles, and they're not good at anything else beyond that.
And that argument comes back to specificity as well, right? Like, what's the goal of the training program? Where are you in that cycle? Like, all of that's really important. And I think on the template customized programming thing, so the other end of my gym membership is a premium membership where people do get a more custom program. That the biggest difference is a lot of them are still using very similar progressions, but we adjust things a little bit more on a weekly basis based on how they're responding to things. But also, I think you'll find a lot of people who are selling customized programming, some level of that programming is going to be templated. Because to scale something like that, and you know this as well as I do as a coach, to scale a product like that, you need some level of systemization that makes the process more streamlined, right? If you have to write out progressions every single time you use them, it becomes a very laborious task. But if instead you can have, like, here's the structure, here's the framework that I use, and then we adjust things around that framework based on that person. Like we've said more than once already, people then tend to fall into groups. They fall into, you know, relatively broad categories, and finding that balance between here's the template and here's the level of individualization that you need to be better and to work on these things is the real art of coaching, right? That being able to, okay, how does this apply to you? Where are you in your cycle? Where are you in your training experience? All of those sort of things. How can we elicit the best response now, but also allow the most room for growth in the response that you have? If the first thing you do with a lifter that you've never really coached before and they've only been training for 2 years is throw shitloads of volume at them, maybe they get a great result early on, but in the long term, in that 5 to 10 year window, is that necessarily the best choice? And I think that's where a lot of people get caught up again in the context and the time frame discussion, knowing that this is a sport you can continue to improve at for a very, very long time if you do it well. when you have the right frame of mind around that, you can understand the process behind the slow and gradual improvement. When all you do is focus on the next 12 weeks or the next 6 weeks before you meet, you very quickly run into problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we've kind of put a couple of notes out there that is opening a whole different can of worms, a whole different can of worms is when to do certain things, when to implement certain aspects into programming and coaching and all that kind of stuff. That's probably a little bit outside of the scope of this discussion. But one other really important part of individualization is understanding limitations to equipment, individual limitations to movement, all of that kind of thing. So there's definitely a case for individualization in powerlifting. What I think is the issue sometimes is that, again, this idea perpetuated that you need something right for you. And that there's nothing wrong with that statement as a standalone thing. You need something right for you, right? What it ignores is the underlying context. What it assumes is that what's right for you is different to what's right for everyone else. I think that's the issue. The ignorance of that fact is that, okay, well, he's given me the same program or she's given me the same program as one of their other lifters. This isn't individualized anymore. Is that the case, or is it an underlying reflection of that coach's beliefs saying that you guys kind of fall under that same bracket and this is going to be right for you and this is going to be right for you?
Yeah, and just because it's right for someone else doesn't mean it's not right for you. Like, that's not how programming works. It's not like, here's program number 3. You've got number 3, I can't use number 3, now I'll go to number 6. Like, that's just stupid. That's not how it works. There are, stereotypes, there are broad groups that people fit into for a reason.
Do you think there's much to add in terms of individualization?
Yeah, nice. That
Why
was
did
good.
we pick the subject?
You did.
Individualization.
I think the important thing to touch on from a coaching perspective is less about technique. It's less about the specifics of training itself, and it's much more about communication, right? How do you establish the relationship with your athletes? How do you communicate the message you want to get across to people? And how do you individualize that? Because that's really important, right? The way I talk to, late middle-aged office worker woman who's never really lifted weights before is going to be a little bit different to the way I would talk to blue-collar tradie who's been lifting weights since he was 6. And that's not a reflection of one's better than the other or anything like that. It's just about understanding the difference in how people learn, in how people communicate, and all of those things that allow you to tailor the message, because the message is generally the same, which I think is sort of the point of this podcast, right? The core of that message is the same regardless of who you are. Then it's the icing on the cake, right? That last little bit that starts to manipulate the message in a way that allows you to effectively communicate and produce an end result, right? That's where that cookie cutter thing comes in. The great thing about cookie cutters is it produces results that are consistent across the board as long as the application is done well, right? Like you said, you can have a cookie cutter that's the wrong fucking cookie cutter for what you want, and you can misapply it or you can put pressure on it in a different way, and suddenly it doesn't work in the way that you expected. So just because you have a coach who's using a template or some framework that they have built over time that is consistent across a group of people doesn't mean that's a bad thing, because the art is in how you apply that, in how you communicate that message, and how that works in a long-term scenario.
Absolutely. And I think that that's kind of like the summary of this whole podcast, right? Is that coaching has to be individualized, because that's what coaching is. That was a really, really good way to put it together. I really like how you did that.
That's what I'm here for. Sultry tones and summaries.
You always do this really well. And I think the important thing to take away from that as well is that even if this coach is saying, I do fully customized program, I would say it says one of two things. It either says they're lying and they probably do templates, because Pretty much every coach is using a template of some way, shape or form. And again, that doesn't mean they use one template for everything and everybody. I don't know about you, but I write templates, and I've probably got 100 that I've written in the last maybe 2 years, 3 years, because I modify them, I build them, and I keep every original copy of each one. And you know, probably 90 of those I probably won't ever touch again. I use, you know, my best current 10, and in 2 years time I'll have another 100 and I'll be just using my best 10 of that. It's just a constant evolution as you learn and grow and develop and all that kind of stuff. But the individualization has to come from the coaching perspective. I was talking to someone else about this the other day, because they were talking about getting a business coach for a brand new business, and I said, well, look at it this way. You've got this money, and the price was ridiculous. It was like $300 a week, and this person, you know, they want to grow their business and they're starting their business, and it's like, if you want to put that money into your business, it's like if you need to buy, let's for example say it's a mowing business, you can put that $300 a week towards a mower and get a mower, right? If you put it towards business coaching, you don't know what that end result looks like. Whereas with an established coach, when you go to an established coach and you're chasing a better squat, a better bench, a better deadlift, you can look at their lifters and be like, this is my product. This is what I am buying. Everything that that coach gives you underneath that assumption is to work towards having that product, having a better squat, having a better bench, having a better deadlift. So using things that their other lifters are using is going to be a benefit, because that's why you went to them in the first place, because you want what their lifters have. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense.
Any good coach has a system, and that system becomes individualized at some point. But like any good business is a systemized business, right? That's how you scale things. That's how you do things on that front, because it becomes something where you can replicate the end product. And a consistent product is the key in the end.
Awesome. So the individualization really comes from the coaching.
Yes. Which I feel like we've just said in 4 different ways. But okay, cool.
Yes. But it's important that the listeners understand this.
Repetition is key, Thomas.
So Sam, our listener, you now understand this.
Fucking better. Well, I think that's a good place to finish. This may well be our final poorly produced sub-professional podcast. There may be in our next episode a slightly higher quality of audio, but we make no promises because we're very much amateurs at this.
Yes. There will likely be lots of technological difficulties. Thank you to John for that.
I don't know what to add.
Say something. Yeah.
Tell your
All
friends.
Right. Thank you very much for tuning in. Tune in next time. Give us a 5-star review. And actually, you know what? Let's touch on this really quickly. So we received an anonymous 1-star review. And I know what you're thinking. They're going to be really salty about this. You know what? I'm not. I welcome the anonymous 1-star reviews with open arms. Because what it says is not about us. It talks about that person. And I believe that person really needs a hug. They need, you know, some reassurance. They need some love. They're a very sad person. So, you know what? Throw us a 1-star. No, don't do that. Throw us a 5-star review. But if you are anonymous and you want to put a 1-star review, get in touch. Let's have a chat. Let's make you feel a little bit better about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do things. You know.
Was that overly passive aggressive?
Etc. But whatever.
That's haters like H and then the number 8, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
Okay.
Cool.
Bye, fam. Never say fam again on the podcast, please.
Turning off the camera.